Hello and welcome to this Salesforce Flow crash course. We'll do a few quick introductions and then we'll get started. My name is Islam. I am an independent consultant. I have completed more than 45 projects. I hold 12 certifications. I built a ton of flows. I have a full flow course on my YouTube channel, and I've got a full nonprofit cloud implementation course as well. What we're going to cover in this crash course is as follows. We'll learn what flows are, how to learn flows, when to use them. Yes, there are times when you shouldn't use flows. I will talk about the development lifecycle, and this is applicable to pretty much any feature we build in the platform, not just flows. We'll learn the importance of data model, particularly for flows. We'll also learn about the different flow types, the elements that are available in each one of those types. We'll talk about the limits, how to build scalable and performant flows. We'll talk about transactions, a very important concept to understand. We'll also talk about resources that are available in flows like variables and constants. We'll talk about the context in record-triggered flows like before save or after save. And then we have a few use cases. We will go and build a screen flow in detail. And then we have some pre-built use cases for the remaining types that we're going to go through quickly and cover some important concepts and ideas and why we use and do some of these. And then at the end, we have some amazing resources so that you can continue your flow journey. That's pretty much for the agenda. Let's get started. Salesforce Flow is pretty much a no-code automation tool. We get to use drag and drop elements to build the automation, similar to the diagram we have to the right side here. This is the start element. It's there for any flow you're going to start. And then we can drag something like this. This is a get element. We use this to get, retrieve, or query records from the database. And then we can use a decision element. And this is like an if statement. If this condition is met, then create a record. If this other condition is met, or if there is no conditions are met, then let's perform this action. How to learn flows? Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying that practice makes perfect. What we're going to do and what I encourage you to do is to have a good understanding of the fundamentals of the basics. And then from there, you take it and you go and practice on as many use cases as possible. You can be creative and come up with your own use cases. You can ask the community for use cases. You can find the use cases that are available on Trailhead. You can ask ChatGPT to give you some use cases, and then you go ahead and build those use cases. Building and making mistakes and try and error, this is the best way to learn. It is important for us to keep the objective in mind. We need to think about what we are trying to achieve. And then as part of the design, we need to think what is the best way to achieve this. And sometimes flows are not the best way to achieve this. There are some tools out there that would achieve the same thing. And sometimes it would be better to use these other tools. Some of the examples are as follows. The first one is declarative lookup rollup summaries or DLRS. And this is used to perform rollups similar to a master detail rollup summary, except this one is for lookup relationships. And you use this to perform aggregates or rollups from children records to a parent record, something like the total count of children records, the sum of amounts, something like this. If you were to use flows, you would have to create 2 or 3 flows. We'll talk about record-triggered flows later on, but we would basically have to create at least 2 flows, one of them to run on create or update, and the other one to run on delete. And when we run it on delete, then this is only running in before save. We'll talk about all of that later on. So sometimes we have to make it run after save. So we have to think of a way to get around this. And we can use a third flow to do that. So you see, it's becoming a hassle. We've got 2 or 3 flows to do the one thing, and then instead you could just build one DLRS that achieves the same thing. And that one DLRS, it's easier to build, it's easier to maintain, it's admin accessible, and I would argue that it is faster as well. Another tool is formulas. We just mentioned record-triggered flows, and we'll talk later about this in much more detail. Record-triggered flows would only run on create, on update, or on delete. Sometimes you need this to calculate at other times. Formulas run whenever they get called. So if you have a formula added on a page layout and you open the page layout, the formula will then calculate at that point in time. If you have formula added as a column on a list view, then whenever you open that list view, then formulas calculate at that point of time. On the other hand, triggered flows will only run on create, update, or delete. So which one is it that we need to achieve? And then based on that, we determine should we go with formulas or should we go with flows. Another tool is user access policies, which is recently released, and that is basically an automation around permission sets. Whenever you need to add or revoke, whenever you need to grant a permission set to a user or revoke a permission set to a user, then we would use user access policies instead. An example is when a user with these conditions is created, then automatically grant them this permission set. When a user with these conditions are updated, then automatically revoke that permission set from them. You could do the same thing with flows, but now that we have a tool that's available out of the box, it's much easier to build, faster to build, and easier to maintain. Another example is giving summary, and this is more specific to folks working in the nonprofit cloud. Nonprofit cloud gives us an object with the whole aggregates and automations working in the background. The giving summary object has some fields and automations available out of the box. Total gifts this year, the total count, the total amount last year, and so on. So a bunch of information, a bunch of data that's available out of the box, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. The last two pieces are if it is personalized or it is complex. And what I mean by personalized is that sometimes the requirement is to build a form, for example, and that form needs to look exactly like that. We need certain colors, we need certain themes, we need the buttons to look like that, placed at that location. If it is very personalized like this, it's something that we can't achieve very easily with Salesforce Flow. Instead, it would be better to use a Lightning Web Component, for example. And the last thing is if the requirement is complex. Flows are amazing. They keep receiving new features and updates all the time, but still there are some capabilities that are not available in flows, but rather available in Apex. In such cases, using Apex triggers or Apex classes, or calling an Apex class or an Apex method from flows would be better. Like any other feature or an implementation, before we build the flow, we need to run through the development lifecycle. We need to run some discovery, ask questions like what is the objective, what are the pain points. Sometimes we come to realize that flow is not the best thing that we need to do here based on that discovery. Then we go ahead and design if it's going to be a flow, if it's going to be something else, if it's going to be a flow, where is it going to live, what is the data model behind it. We put together a solution and then we go ahead and build. After the build, we run some tests. We ask the customer to test. If there is a need to deploy, then we go ahead and deploy into another org. And then we go live. After even going live, we may collect some feedback and then do some bug fixing or add some enhancements and then reiterate that process. Having a good understanding of data modeling and relationship is very, very important, because when you build a flow or when you review or troubleshoot a flow, one thing that you will keep doing a lot is traversing, moving from the triggering record to something else, from where the user is currently at to something else. So if a user, for example, is on the account page and then they run a flow, then they are currently on the account page. And then if you need to know how many opportunities they have, then you're going to need to move from the account to opportunities. So you're going to query the opportunity. So you need to know what is the relationship between the opportunity and the account. If you need to get the orders, then you need to know how is the order related to the account. How are you going to move from account to order, from order to account, things like that. And this is applicable to record triggered flows, screen flows, whatever flow you're going to build, you're going to need to move and traverse from one record to another record. So it is important to have that data model available. If you don't have it available, ask for it as part of the discovery or as part of the design. If you don't have it available, then you need to run some discovery, know what the objects are, try to figure out the data model, and you can put it together on Canva or any sheet and just draw it as a reference for you as you build. The main types of flows are as follows. The first one is a screen flow, and this is meant to collect user input or display something to the user, hence the name screen. An example is we want to run a survey and we need to collect that input, like how did you like the experience, that we can do that on a screen flow. It's like a form. The second type is a record triggered flow, and this is a set of operations or logic that run on create of a certain record of a certain object, or on update or on delete, with certain conditions. Of course, we don't get it to run every time, but an example is whenever we receive an opportunity or a gift of a certain amount. So if we receive an opportunity, or which means when an opportunity gets created where the amount is greater than $1,000, then automatically send an email to someone, a thank you email, or maybe alert some internal user. A scheduled triggered flow is a set of operations or logic that run on a certain interval, like daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. An example is to every day, every night, check if we have any cases that have a high priority and they are not closed yet. Count how many of those are, and then send an email to the manager that we still have some open cases. Something like this runs on daily, or like on a certain interval. An auto-launched flow is mainly a way to group logic together, repeated logic, to apply the concept of dry, do not repeat yourself. So let's say, for example, that you have a massive screen flow, like 100 elements, and you need to just, like, you're repeating some of the logic again and again in the same flow. So you can take the first set of logic, and then you save them as an auto-launched flow, and then you call them again. You call the same auto-launched flow again and again in that screen flow. So it's this is one of the main use cases, which is to group repeated logic so that you can reuse it. The last type is a platform event triggered flow. And this is good for separating transactions. We'll talk about transactions later, but assuming that I need the first transaction, the first set of operations, to commit to the database before I run another set of logic, then it would be good to run a platform event that commits the first transaction, and then it will automatically trigger another flow that is a platform event triggered flow to run the second set of operations. We'll talk more about this later. Now let's talk about elements. We have a screen, and this is different from a screen flow. A screen is one of the elements in a screen flow, and we use a screen to either collect user input or display data from the system. And on a screen, we get to add some components. I know it's theory right now. We'll talk practically later on. We use a screen to add components on it, and for each component, it does something. We can add a text component to collect a text, like first name or last name. We add an email component to collect an email, and this is basically text in a format, in an email format. We can also add a display text to display some information to the user. We also have a subflow element, and this is used to call an auto-launched flow. Say we already created an auto-launched flow and we're ready to call it from another flow, then we add a subflow element, and then we use it to call an auto-launched flow. We also have an action element that we use to perform some actions like send email, email alert, and custom notification. For each one of those, we have some attributes. When sending email, then it's going to ask you what's the to address, what's the from address, what's the subject, what's the email, and so on. Next, we have the yellow elements, and these are not interacting with the database. These are just like manipulating the data in the flow. The first one is an assignment, and we use this to assign a value to a resource. or to a field. For example, if we have an account and we need to set the name, then what we're gonna do is account name equals value. So we're taking that value and we're putting it into the account name. And remember, this is in the flow. It's not in the database yet. We'll talk about this in a second. But when we say account name equals Bravo, that does not update it in the database. We're still going to do the update or the create in a later step. But for now, we're just like setting and preparing the data that's eventually going to go to the database. So we use an assignment to assign those values. In a flow, we can have a collection of records. So we're going to talk about the get elements in a second, but we can basically query or get some records from the database. Say get or collect 10 opportunities or like all the opportunities in the system. Let's say we only have 10 opportunities in the system. So we got all those 10 opportunities and now we have them as part of the flow. And we want to separate this collection of 10 records into two collections instead. A collection of opportunities where the amount is greater than 500, and then another collection of opportunities where the amount is less than 500. And this is what you use a collection filter for. A decision is basically an if statement. If the opportunity amount is greater than 500, then do X. If it is less than 500, then do Y. And then we have a loop, and now that we have maybe one or two or three collections, then we can go through each record of a collection. If we have 10 opportunities, for each one of those opportunities, we're gonna do something. We'll see how to apply all of this later. A sort is basically to sort things based on a specific field. If we have an amount, a name field, then it can be an alphabetical sort. If we have an amount field or a number field, then it can be based on that number in an ascending or descending manner. And the last thing is a transform element. And a transform element is like a combination of assignment and loop and formulas, 3-in-1 kind of thing. An example would be if we want to if we have, let's say we have a list of opportunities and we have a custom field on the opportunity called number of purchased items. Let's just assume that we have, so we have opportunity object and we have the opportunity amount field and we have the custom field on opportunity called number of purchased items. And we need to set the amount field on these 10 opportunities that we have in the system. We need the amount to be as follows. Amount equals 1000 times number of purchased items. So that number of purchased items is not a static value. It is dynamic. Everyone has a different value. The first opportunity has number of purchased items equals 2. The second opportunity has number of purchased items equals 3. So that number is different. So what we're going to do is we basically want to go through each one of those opportunities, and for each one set the amount field to be equal to 1000 times number of purchased items. We use a transform element to do that. So it's basically like a combination of assignment, loop, and formula. I'll show you how to do that later. The last group of elements are as follows. We have the create. Remember, we assign the values to a record, and then when we're ready to create it, we call this on that record to create it. We can also perform an update. If we're going to perform an update or a delete, then we're going to need to provide the ID. So if we have an account record in a flow, we set the name, but we also need to remember to set the ID if we're going to perform an update and if we're going to perform a delete as well. A get is used to query or get records from the database, like get all opportunities where the amount is greater than 500. And the rollback is a way for you to just, if records got committed to the database, you can revert them back, roll them back from the database. When an error happens, for example, records are rolled back automatically, but if you want to call it manually to roll back some records from the database, you can do that as well. In Salesforce, we have some limits. The most common ones, this is referred to as governor limits. The most common ones are DML. DML stands for data manipulation language. And this is basically whenever you use a create element, an update element, a delete element. So each one of those is going to consume one DML. Whether you're creating one record or creating multiple records, creating a collection of records. If you use one create element, that's at 1 DML. And in one transaction, we'll talk about transactions later. In one transaction, the limit is 150 DML. And the second thing is SOQL, and that stands for Salesforce Object Query Language. And in the context of flows, this means the get element. We'll talk about like how this can be consumed in an update element in a second. But basically, we have a limit of 100 SOQL queries, or like 100 queries per transaction. Now, the consumption is as follows. Whenever you use a create element, that consumes 1 DML. If you use an update element, in which we'll show you that later, but when you use an update element, you have the option to filter which records are you going to update. If you use the filter part of the update, then this is going to use one SOQL, because it's basically querying these records that meet the conditions that you set, and then it's going to perform an update on them. So it's kind of performing both of them, like a SOQL and 1 DML. If you don't set a filter on the update element, then it's going to only consume 1 DML. So one update element might actually consume one SOQL and 1 DML. A loop, it doesn't consume a DML or SOQL, but it does take time. So, and that time counts towards the CPU time, which is another limit that we haven't talked about, but it is generally recommended that you do not perform a loop inside another loop, because that takes more time and you risk going hitting the limit of CPU time. We also have a get element, and that consumes 1 SOQL, and then the delete element, which consumes 1 DML. Let's talk about transactions. A transaction is a set of operations. An example is get account, and then update contact, and then send email as part of one flow. So this here is a set of operations, which means a transaction. This is one transaction here. And what defines a transaction as well is that all of this is going to succeed, or all of it is going to fail. So if the send email, for example, fails for some reason, then all of these three are failed. Nothing gets committed to the database, nothing gets sent out, nothing. It's either the entire transaction is successful, or the entire transaction is rolled back. It's not successful. Now, what's the need for doing this? Like, why don't we like partially do this? Like, if this is successful, then this is just successful. If this is successful, this is successful. If this one fails, then this one only fails. The need is here. Like in this case, it might not be very obvious, but here the need is going to be very obvious. Assuming that we have like two operations. One operation where we deduct $1,000 from bank A. This is like a money transfer. And then that $1,000 needs to be transferred to another bank. So it's entered in another bank. So we're deducting 1,000 from here, and then we are adding that 1,000 into another bank. What if when we add that 1,000 on the other bank, it fails, like this second operation fails? We don't want the first 1,000 to be deducted and then not get added into the second account. This would be a problem. So the entire transaction is rolled back basically for safety. So this is the reason behind our transaction. Now, a very important question here to ask is, when does a transaction start or begin, and then when does it end? Let's say that we have a flow, and then in the flow you have a start element, and then at the end you have an end element. Does that mean that the start element is the beginning of the transaction, and then the end element is the end of the transaction? It's not the case, but let's simplify. Assuming that that we have a record that we just we're going to create, and the only process that runs on creation of this record, when we create a record, the only process that's going to run is a record triggered flow, then in that case, and that scenario almost doesn't exist, but in that case, the start of the flow is the beginning of the transaction, and the end of the flow is the end of the transaction. But like I said, that scenario almost doesn't exist. There are So like, what is the beginning of the transaction and what's the end? The transaction starts after, like, with the very first process that runs, and then it ends after all the processes that are associated with the creation or update of that record end. When you create a record, like at the moment you click save, there is system validations like required fields or like page, like required at the page layout or required at the field level. There are some validation rules or before save updates, before save flows, before save apex, after save flows, after save apex, apex trigger, sending an email, a platform event, things like this. So there is a roll-up summary as well. So there is multiple processes that run. So it's not just like that flow, that record flow, the record triggered flow that we created. It is multiple processes. So the moment you click save, this is the beginning of the transaction. And then after all of these processes complete, that's the end of the transaction. So that's the beginning and that's the end. In some cases, you would want to intentionally end a transaction for some reason. One thing that that happens at the end of the transaction is that records get committed to the database. So records are not committed to the database until the transaction completes. In the example to the right side here, we are performing an update on a contact. This update, even though it is before send the email, it doesn't get committed to the database until the entire transaction actually completes successfully without problems. Then it actually gets updated in the database. So an update, a create, a delete, all of these will happen at the end of a transaction. And say that sometimes you want to end the transaction for one reason. For example, after you commit a record, then in the case of an update, it's not very meaningful, but let's assume that we're creating a record. Like one of the steps here is to create a record. That record doesn't have an ID yet. When it is like still in the flow, it's not committed to the database yet. It doesn't have a record ID. It doesn't have a created at. It doesn't have a created by. All of this system information is not available yet because it hasn't been committed to the database yet. Let's say that a later step in the flow, you need that information. You need the record ID, but you don't have it yet. So you need to be intentional about ending the transaction and starting another one. So how could you end the transaction and start another one? In screen flows, a transaction ends with every screen. So if you want to end the transaction, you can add a screen. Or if you're using 5 screens, then you know that you have you're ending a transaction and starting a new transaction with every one of those screens. In a record triggered flow, you can add an asynchronous path or a scheduled path. Each one of those is going to end the transaction and then start another transaction. If you use a platform event with after commit, then this is another way to end the transaction and start another transaction. You don't have to remember all of this, but just it's just important to know that transactions are important. When does a transaction start and when does it end? And there is a way to end the transaction and start another one. When building flows, we create resources that help us with the build. The resource types are as follows. The first one is a constant. And a constant is a static value that you assign to a constant with the name pi or gravity, something like that, or maybe a price. And the reason you want to assign a static value like this to a resource is that you don't have to repeat yourself. An example is assuming that we have a price of 1,000 and you use it 3 or 4 times in the flow. After 1 year from now, the price changes from 1,000 to 1,500 and you need to change it. And instead of going to those 3 different or 4 different places to change it, you just change it once. You change the value of the constant, and the constant is used in those 3 or 4 different places. It gets changed automatically. It's similar to the concept where we use the auto-launched flow to group logic, and we use that in multiple places. And that's dry. You do not repeat yourself. And then we have a variable, and that's a resource that's which has a value that changes throughout the flow. An example is if we have a variable named mood and it is happy at the beginning of the flow, and then towards the end of the flow that value changes from happy to not happy anymore. We have different data types of variable. We'll talk about them in a second. A resource, another resource is a formula. An example is if you want to change the price to be, instead of 1000 to be 2000 at some point in the flow, then the price or pi times 2. So you manipulate the values from constants or variables or anything. You can manipulate the data in here. A text template is basically rich text, and you would use this in an email body or on a display text on a screen component, on a screen element. We also have a choice, and that a choice is similar to just a text value that you can use in multiple places. Assuming, for example, that you have three yes/no questions on a screen, and you would like all of them have two answers, yes or no. You can assign, create one choice for yes and another choice for no, and then you repeat, use yes in those three questions and use no in those three questions. You don't want to set the to set it manually, like yes and yes and yes, so that in the future, and it's unlikely to happen here, but if that yes changes to yup, or and no changes to nada or something, you change it at the choice level, and then it automatically changes in all those three places instead of having to change them one by one. A collection choice set or a record choice set, this is basically you query some records from the database, and then you choose one field to represent a list. For example, if you have a pick list component on a screen, and you're asking like what choose an account, and then you want a drop down that shows the list of accounts, the list of account names. So you query the list of accounts from the system, and you specify the account name to be the field that we're going to use in the list. So that's a list of account names in here. We have a picklist choice set resource, and this is basically the picklist values. You say from that object, this is the picklist field, and I need the values of that picklist in here. And you use it in the same way where you add a picklist component on a screen, and you need the values of that picklist to be the same values as the picklist of the object, and it remains in sync. So if you add a new value to the picklist at the object level, it gets automatically added to the picklist choice set. The last one here is a stage, and this is if you add a progress bar, like if you have 4 screens and then the first screen represents the first stage. So at the top of the screen, a progress bar that shows the current stage, next stage, and next stage. So we can set the stage this way. Now, in regards to the data types, remember we can create a variable of data type text that was mood, but we can create variables of other data types, like a data type number, maybe like we assign a value of 5, and then later on we assign it a value of 9, something like the current price, like maybe we create a variable called current price, and then our price would be a currency. Current price equals 1000, and then later in the flow we change the price, we add like tax or something, then becomes 1000. And 50, something like this. We can also create a date, a pick list. I have no idea how to use pick list or multi-select pick list as variables. I have not tried that before, but looks like these are available options. We also have a Boolean, just like to cover all of these. And then we have a record data type as well. And this is very important. So this is like a record from the database, an account, an opportunity. It can be a variable. And we also have an apex defined, and I like to think of this like an object. We didn't create an object, but we create a class in apex. I like to think of it that it's like an object. An example would be a car, and then we have fields like number of seats, a number of wheels, whatever. So it's something that you would rarely use. Let's talk about context in record triggered flows. And what we mean by context is that when you create a record triggered flow, it's going to ask you, are you creating a fast field updates flow, or are you creating or an actions and related records flow? These are the two options. And this is what we mean by context. It's one of these two options. In Salesforce, we have two ways to build triggers or automations that run on CRUD operations, on create, on update, on delete. These are declarative ways, like record triggered flows, or programmatic ways, and that's Apex trigger. If you were to create an Apex trigger, you will have one of two options. It's either a before save trigger or an after save trigger. In record triggered flows, that translates to fast field updates, which is similar to before save triggers, and actions and related records, which is similar to after save Apex trigger. And you're gonna hear this from other Salesforce professionals. People are going to say before save flow. They mean fast field updates of a record triggered flow. And when people say after save flow, they're referring to actions and related records in a record triggered flow. Now, let's talk about the timeline. Remember, the timeline and the order of execution is not just what's happening because of this flow, but it's rather like broader than this. When you click save on a record, a few things happen, like system validation, like required fields, and then there might be some validation rules, and there might be some declarative automations, record triggered flows, and then there would be programmatic triggers, Apex triggers, and there might be other things that are running when you click save. So there is just more than just the timeline of the flow, but we're gonna focus on the flow only for now. Just remember there's other things that may be happening. Starting off with when you go to create a new record, you go to a list view, you click new, you populate some data, and then you click save. We're talking about the part before you clicked save. Now we haven't clicked save yet. At this point, this is the record that you are attempting to create or update. The database is still empty. This record has not gone to the database yet, and then you haven't clicked save yet. And then you click save. What happens after you click save is after you click save, the record, the before save flow is going to run. Let's say that we have an automation called auto rename that's running in fast field updates. This flow is going to run at this point. At this point, the record has not been sent to the database yet. Before save or fast field flows is like if you were to type one additional field like the description field, but you don't want to do it and you want the system to do it for you. So it's as if someone is actually typing it down on the record before it actually gets saved to the database. So fast field updates run the moment you click save, and they perform some updates on the record, like renaming the name field, doing something in the description field, updating some date on the record, some updates on the record that triggered the flow, not on any other record. It's only on the record that triggered the flow. There are some characteristics of the record at this point. Because it hasn't been sent to the database yet, it doesn't have a record ID, it doesn't have a created date, and it doesn't have a last modified date. This is information that gets generated after the record gets saved to the database. So before save flows run before this happens. Like this hasn't happened yet. Next, immediately after, the after save flow is going to run. Assuming that we have an after save flow on the same object, then after save flow is going to run. After save, you might have an operation like send an email out. This is just like an example. There are other things. At this point, the after save flow will have access to the following information. At this point, the record got sent to the database, got saved into the database. And the fact that it is now in the database, it means that a record ID has been generated, the created date field has been populated, and the last modified date has been populated. And the fact that we have a record ID here means that you can create related records right now. Remember, if you were to create a child record, you're gonna need to populate that lookup or master detail field And to do that, you're going to need the ID of that record. So if you're, let's say that this save button is on a parent record, and then we're going to need to create a child record. To create the child, you're going to need the record ID of the parent. So in order to create a related record, it has to run on after save because you need the record ID. Then after this after save flow runs, at this point, one of two things is going to happen. It's either this is like everything is successful from before save and after save, then the record is committed to the database. You're going to see these two terms in Salesforce documentation. If you were to reading like what happens after save in after save flow, it's going to say the record after save is saved to the database but not committed yet. If it is successful, then it gets committed to the database. If it fails, then it gets rolled back from the database. So the term saved means that it actually got sent to the database, but it is waiting or pending to make sure that this process and every other process is successful before it remains in the database. So the word committed means that it's now remaining and continue to remain in the database. Everything has been successful. If it is just saved, then there is still some process that's going to run. And all of this is running in one transaction. Once the transaction is successful, then the record stays put in the database. If it fails, then it gets rolled back from the database. So yes, a record can get saved and then gets rolled back from the database. We have a rule of thumb, or maybe I have a rule of thumb for record triggered flows. Always create before save flows. Always create before save flows. And then when you do that, something is going to stop you. You're trying to create a related record. You will not be able to do that. And that's your clue that you need to move to after save or actions and related records, record triggered flow. It's good to know the difference between these two so that you can put any updates that you know can run in a before save flow in a before save flow, and you put any updates that you know requires an after save flow in an after save flow. This helps the org become more performant. The performance is better because fast field updates are fast and after save flows are not as fast. And we're talking milliseconds, but as the org scales and grows in volume of records, then this is very helpful in terms of performance. So rule of thumb is before save flows. If it doesn't let you do what you're trying to do, then you're going to change to after save flow. Okay, let's go ahead with a screen flow. And the use case we have is that we're collecting customer feedback, assuming that we're gonna run a screen flow somewhere, regardless. And in that screen flow, we need to collect the person information, first name, last name, email, their company, the name of their company. And then we're gonna ask them two feedback questions: rate your experience and how can we improve. Okay, so this is the Salesforce org, and I have previously created the object for feedback. So I just want to show you the object first. Assuming these things already exist, so I'm just going through this quickly to show you what that looks like. So I've got the how can we improve, which is a long text area, and then we have the rate your experience, which is a pick list with the values. This is the list of values that we have for this feedback, and then the company is just the account record, and the first name, last name, email are going to go into the contact. So this is all the information that we need to collect, and then we need to create. Now, an approach or like a mindset to have in mind is to think, of a minimum viable product first. We just want to build a flow that works, and then we're going to think about the enhancements, the bug fixes, all of this at a second step. As you build more and more flows, then you know what to account for, what to be careful of when you build it the first time. But like, don't worry about it. Start with a flow that works, and then try to fix them and improve it on later phases or later steps. And I don't. When I say like on later phases, it doesn't have to be like too late, but rather like you build it and then like you test and then you make some updates, maybe on the same day, maybe like after you have a product that's being tested by you and being tested by the customer, and all is good and you go live. Things might still happen, a bug might come through, an error might come through. This is when you continue to improve that flow, and you don't have to worry about it. It happens to the best of us. So build like a flow that works and then improve it from there. All right, we're gonna start with a screen flow. So I have already created like from the setup menu. If you don't have this tab here, the flows, then you can use the extension called Y Salesforce by Warren. Y Salesforce Chrome extension. You can use this one to add tabs like this. Alternatively, you can search for flows, and this is where you can create a new flow. Also, Salesforce is running a new automation app that you can use as well to start a new flow. After starting a new flow, then it's going to ask you what type of flow you want to start. You can select. Typically, I go from scratch. I don't know if how many people use the templates. And then I selected the screen flow. We'll talk about the other types later. I'll just go back now to the flow that just started. And we will add a screen first thing. And this is where we're going to collect that information. So we're going to say information screen. I like adding the keyword screen in here so that basically in any flows you build, API names are reserved. So if you use the keyword information in here without the word screen, then if you try to use the word information elsewhere, you can't, because it was already reserved for this flow, for this screen. So I'd rather just like put the word screen so that the keyword information remains available for me if I need to use it elsewhere. Also, it's easier to filter down things in resources. If you want to see only the screens, then you can type the keyword screen and then you're going to see all the screens. I typically hide this header and the pause button, and on the first screen I had the previous as well. You can do this from configure here header. I'm gonna hide this, and then under configure footer, I'm gonna hide the previous button, and I'm gonna hide the pause button as well. The information we need to collect are first name and last name. You can do this by adding 2 text fields, or you can add the name input. So we can say this is first name, and this is both of them. So this is just the name, and this is like one component that has 2 components in it. The name component, inside it there is the first name component and then the last name component, or maybe just like one component that has 2 parts. And then the second thing we need to collect is the email, and here I'm just gonna name it email. Every component you add is going to have a set of attributes, like making a field required, making it read only, adding some placeholder text, and every component has different attributes. Feel free to read through these. We're just trying to get as much done as possible today. So we've got first name, we've got last name, and we've got email. Feel free to add like a section like this, and then you can add a header to it. And this section would be contact information, for example, just to be a little bit organized. And this is a section that you can add components in. So I can drag this inside this, and then here, and then I can repeat the same thing for company. I'm gonna add a header, company information, and I'm gonna add a text input for the name of the company. I'll just say company name, and we can add a third section here, and that's the feedback or survey questions. Now we have two questions. The first one is rate your experience, and if you remember, rate your experience was a pick list. So I'm gonna add a pick list here. That's rate your experience. There is another way that you can actually drag fields, but it's not. I think it's not mature yet, so I prefer to use this way. This is rate your experience, and we need the values in here to be the same values of the pick list on the feedback object. To do that, we're gonna go down here under the choice, and I'll click that, and I'll click new choice resource. And I'll show you another way to create your resources in a second. So I'm gonna click new choice resource, and I'll select the resource type to be a pick list choice set. And I'll name this pick list choice set underscore rate your experience. See, I can't use rate your experience because it was already used as a name for the component, and I can't use it now as a name for a resource. They have to be, the API name is reserved. So it's good to do this prefix. It is referred to as Hungarian notations, where you add prefixes to resource names. And then in the object, I want to select the object feedback. And we're going to select the data type pick list. So it's just like this is a way to filter down which fields that you're trying to get. And then it's going to show you the list of fields that are of object type feedback and of data type pick list. And there is only one. So this is the one that we're going to need. And that's it. We're going to click outside. Even though we added like one thing in here, but it's going to grab all the choices. So it might sound like it's one choice, but it's not. It's actually multiple choice. I mean, multiple single selected choices. And that list is the list from this field. The second question was a long text area. So if I search for text, we're going to see long text area here. And that is how can we improve? How can we improve? And let's keep it at that. So we've got the screen. I'm going to click done and I'll save. You might want to get into the habit of saving almost after every action you take. Let's name this customer survey. You can click debug to start seeing what it will eventually look like. We're gonna need to take this and add it to some page. But for now, if you want to see what that looks like before you actually add it to any page, then you can click debug to see what that looks like. So this is what it looks like. And then you see the pick list is now grabbing these values. So far, so good. Now, this is not sending anything to the database yet. It's not mapping to the correct fields on the object itself. So the person just entered this information. Now we need to take that entered information and use it to create a contact, and use it to create a company, and use it to create the feedback. To do this, let's go with create element to create the contact. So we're going to use 3 create elements: create contact, create account, and create feedback. There is the issue of duplicates and making sure that what we enter doesn't go and create a duplicate, like the contact. What if the contact exists in the database? I'm not addressing this right away. I'll just start with a create right away, and then save and test. And once I confirm, I'm assuming like this is your first time doing something like this, perhaps, then just like get something going, get it to create, even if it creates a duplicate, and then make it a second step or a second iteration where you fix that duplicate issue. Let's learn one thing at a time. Let's go ahead and create customer contact, and I'm going to select how to set the record field values. I'm going to select manually, and here I'm going to select the object. What we're creating is a contact, and it automatically populates the required fields in here. So the required fields are last name. I also know that we've got first name, and we've got the email. The fields on the left side here, this is the object fields, not the fields from the screen. So what we're going to do is that we're going to take this value, first name, last name, and email from the screen, and we're going to put them into the record fields in here. So we're going to take the last name from the screen. It was called the name field. That's the name component on the screen. And you can also click here and then open the information screen to see the components on the screen. One of them is the name component. Inside the name component, we have first name and we have last name. Let's find last name. There is last name. So we're taking the value from the screen, from the last name field, and we're mapping it to the last name on the contact record. What this create records is doing, it's going to create a record in the database. We're going to repeat this for the last name as well. So we're going to go to the name component, and then I need first name. And then the last thing we need here is the email. And the email has multiple outputs. The one that we need is the value. This is the actual email that's getting entered. There are some other outputs that we typically don't use, but if you need to use them, you can. So this is the create customer contact, and then the second create is going to be create account. We're going to select manually as well. We're going to select the account object. And what is the account name? The account name is from the information screen, and I need the company name. And the last thing here is the create survey, create feedback. And we're going to select manually as well. We're going to select the feedback object, and let's start populating these fields. The contact is going to be the contact that got created earlier. So the create records, if I were to reference that create records element, after it eventually creates the contact in the database, it does return the contact ID. So if I actually search for contact here, it's going to say contact ID from create customer contact. So that create element is returning a contact ID. And I'm gonna populate the account. You see now the contact disappeared because we already mapped it up here. Account is going to be the same thing. I'm gonna search for create. This is the account ID from create account from earlier. And then we've got two more fields. We've got rate your experience, and this is from the information screen, rate your experience. This is the selected choice. And then the last thing is how can we improve? This is also from the screen, and how can we improve? Let's save this. And let's debug. And let's run. And let's try this. Let's just populate this with any information. I've got this is the name of the company, and we've got some, and let's go ahead and click next. So it says all done, and I can see here that the create records here, like it does create a record. It says like it's ready to be created when the next when the transaction ends, basically. And there is the record ID here. There is the record ID here. There is the record ID here. So it seems that everything is successful. If I were to go to accounts, it's already showing up here, the one that we just created. And let's actually go to the feedback object instead, and that's going to be a better way to look at this. Let's make an adjustment to this list view. I need account, contact, how can we improve, and the radio experience, and I also want to create the date. So we see everything here. The contact got created, the account got created, and the feedback got created. So all of this is good. Now this is what I call the first iteration. Like now we've got a flow. It's working just fine. Now let's, like, after this first phase, now this is the time when you start thinking, what could go wrong? What can we improve? And then like you start taking those ideas and thoughts and you experiment with this flow, and then you start improving these things. As you, like, if you were to test this again, and you enter the same account, then you will notice that it's if I'm gonna enter the same account now, and I'll populate everything else, same account, and then I go with next, and this is done. If I were to go to accounts, it now created a duplicate. Now this is one problem that we found from testing. Then we go ahead and fix that. So to do that, there is I'm gonna like query, does this account exist in the database first before I go ahead and do that. So we can add like a get element. So get account. First, I want to check, does an account with this name exist in the system? I'm going to search accounts. Is there an account in the system where the name equals the one that was entered on the screen? Sorry, company. And down here, I'm gonna select choose fields, and let's see if we'll do the rest. What this is doing, like I'm just saying, only give me the ID. I don't need any other fields from this record. I just need the ID, and we need to return only one record. So if this get element finds an account, it means we don't need to create an account. So in this case, I'm going to add a decision here to check if this get returns an account. So I'm gonna say found account, and then yes, found account, and then no. I like decision elements to be in yes, no format, and nothing else. If I have two conditions, I'm gonna have two decision elements, right, one after another. I'd rather do that over making a decision have multiple outcomes. Found account, yes. How do you know that it does find an account? If the get element, so I'm gonna click that get account, and then I'm gonna click outside. So if this get element basically returns a record. So if this record is null, false, is not null, meaning it doesn't have a value, meaning there is a record. So if it does find a record, then that's the yes path, and then that's the no path. If there is no record, I'm gonna cut this, and I'm gonna put it down here. If there is no record, then go ahead and create it. If there is a record, then there is no need to create it. Let's save this for a second, and this introduces one problem that we need to fix. Well, if assuming that an account exists in the system, if it's gonna go down this path and then it goes to create feedback, and it's gonna take the account here, it's gonna take the account ID from create, but the flow hasn't gone through the create. So where is it getting the account ID from? If I were to debug this, let me close these things. I didn't like many tabs, and let's try the same, not this. Okay, let's click next. And now a feedback got created. Let's go check that feedback. See, this is the problem now. Even though the account exists, but it's empty. Why is it empty? Because this is when the account, when the feedback got created, it's referencing the account ID from create account. We didn't go, like the flow didn't, it does find an account, and because it does find an account, it takes this path. When it takes this path, it means an account was not created. It means this account ID from create account is blank, it's empty. So if it does find an account, then we need that account ID to be here instead. So what we're going to do here is basically we need something in here, like at this point, to take this account ID or this account ID, whichever comes. We need one of these two. To do that, I'm going to create a container to contain the account ID because it's different. We might have an ID from the create account. We might have an ID from a get account. So I'm going to create a new resource. This is the second way to create a resource. I'm going to create a new resource. I'm going to select variable. This is where I'm going to put the account ID. This is a text variable, account ID, a text. I'm going to select the text and done. So now I created the container, I created the variable. It's empty right now. What we need to do is, if an account got created, then I'm going to use an assignment element. And the assignment, what's going to do is it takes a value and it puts it in some field or resource or container. So I'm going to say assign account ID from create. In the left side, I'm going to put the text account ID. And in the right side, I'm going to use create account ID from create. We're taking the account ID from create, and we're putting it into the text variable account ID. Now I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to say assign account ID from get. I'm just using some names to help us understand how this is going. Earlier I said like at this point, but I mean like before this point. So what's happening is let's do this assignment first. This text variable account ID now, we don't want to populate it with the one from create. We want to populate it with the one from the get. So this is the account from get, and I need the account ID. Account ID. Now, the flow is going to take one of two paths. If it does find an account, then it's going to go here and it's going to assign this account ID that it does find into this variable. And then if it doesn't find an account ID, it's going to first create that account, and then it's going to get that account ID from the created account. It's going to put it into that variable. Now, at this point here, like here, the text variable account ID has the correct ID. Now I'm going to go into this create feedback, and then I'm going to reference that text variable instead. So it's going to reference whatever is in the account ID, whether it's coming from get or whether it's coming from create. Let's click save and let's debug and let's run. Let's populate it with anything, and now let's try this and let's click next. Now let's refresh. Now this is the new one. We've got the account being populated just fine. And this is just an example of improvements that you can do. You're going to need to do another duplicate management for the customer contact. Another improvement you can do here is to change this button from saying next or from saying finish to maybe say submit. Maybe you can add component visibility so that this section only shows up after the user populates this section. We haven't covered all of this, but I'm just like stressing the concept that just build a minimum viable product and then improve. This is basically like a basic Screen flow. We'll talk about the other use cases later. In an effort to make this crash course fairly short and not make it go forever, I already built the upcoming use cases, and I'll just demo them for the purposes of saving some time. In regards to a record triggered flow, here is a use case, a scenario. Whenever a feedback is created where the rate your experience field is dissatisfied, then we need to automatically create a case and send an email to leadership. Let's see how to do that. You can, as always, you can navigate to flows from setup, and then you can search for flows to create a new flow. From here, you can go to the object on which you want to create a flow, any object really, and then you go to flow triggers, and then you can click new flow. This is meant for record triggered flows only, and you can also go to the new automation app to start a flow as well. These are all the ways. I have already created a record triggered flow here. In the beginning, in the start element, you specify the object when you would like it to trigger on create or on update. Set some conditions like we need this to run only if the rate your experience equals to dissatisfied. The entry conditions is very important. You want to use this as much as possible, and you want to make it as tight as possible so that flows don't run all the time. You just need it to run when these conditions are met to have a performant org. And then down here we specify, is it before save or after save? Because we're sending an email and we're creating a different object record, a record in a different object, then we need to use actions and related records. Remember our rule of thumb, you can go with fast field updates, and if it stops you from doing what you're trying to do, then you can switch to actions and related records. And then we've got a create element here to create a case. We're selecting manually to specify the object case, and then feel free to populate the fields here. You specify the field to the left side, and to the right side you specify the value. So the way it works, you set the field first to the left side, and then you set the value to the right side. But the way it actually works after you run it, the flow is going to take that value, put it into the this field. So it works right to left. You build it left to right, but then it actually works right to left. And then we need to send an email. Let me skip the get element for a second. We need to send an email, and we need to send this email to the leadership user, whoever that user is. And to find this send email action, you can start an action element and then find send email in it as one of those actions in the action element. Or you can just like search for send email right away. This is a good way to just save a little bit of time, whichever is faster in terms of clicks. Every action is going to receive some attributes. The ones we need to send the email are the body, and then the email of the person. And the email, we got like to get the email dynamically instead of hard coding it, I used a get leadership here, get leadership user. And I'm just querying the user who meets certain conditions, like you can say like a user whose last name is something. I am not setting this to any particular user, just to get any user for the purposes of this demo. And I want to retrieve the ID and the email only, and that's it. And then we're going to use that email in the action here. You want to set rich text format to true. You've got only like true or false. True or false, these are the only values that go in here, and use line breaks as well. And this just like this makes it rich instead of plain text. And then you set this the subject as well. There are some good attributes here if you wish to use them as well. Okay, now let's look at a schedule triggered flow use case. Every morning we need to send the number of open cases to leadership. Let's see how to do that. So we've got a schedule triggered flow that I started as well. We looked at how to create a new flow. You can select a schedule triggered flow. And then in the start element here, we set when we need it to run for the first time, and then how often do we want it to run from that time moving forward. And then we get to select an object, and this is optional because you want to do this only if you need to perform one operation per record. So if you select an object here, account, and you give them some conditions, like I want to go through only active accounts, for example, then what this is going to do is that it's going to perform this logic for each one of those records. So it's going to go take the first record, perform this logic, and then it's going to start another flow interview, go through another flow interview for the second account, perform the logic, third account, perform the logic, fourth account, perform the logic, and so on. It might be good for a use case, for example, for each account, create a case. For each account, create a case. So it's going to do that. In our case, we don't want to perform a lot of operations. We just need to do only one thing, and that is calculate the number of cases and send one email. So because we perform only one thing, and we don't want it to repeat for each record of any particular object. So we're not going with the object here. We just need to get the cases and count them, and then send them in an email. To query the cases, I'm going to use a get element, select the object case, and then find all the cases where the status is not closed. Get me all these cases, and I only need the ID. I don't need anything else because I'm just performing an aggregate. And then we're going to use the transform element to perform this aggregate or that count. Previously, we needed to use either an assignment with the equals count operator, or perform a loop and then count inside the loop. The transform element saves us from all of that hassle. You give it the source data, that is the list of cases, the collection of cases. And then the output is a number data type, a number variable or resource. And then when you link these two together, then it automatically creates this aggregate. It understands that you are trying to perform something between a list and a number. So it understands automatically that it's either going to be a count or a sum. You can select that. And then this is basically the output of this transform element. And then in the send email, these two steps are pretty much the same as before. In the body, I'm just putting the number of cases, but you can always create a text template instead and populate it if you want. For now, I'm just like putting the number of cases in here, and we're sending an email. Now let's look at auto-launched flows. And one of the main uses of an auto-launched flow is that if you write some logic in one flow, and then you build another flow, and you realize that you are building some logic that you already built in a different flow. In other words, you are starting to repeat yourself. And there is a concept of dry Do not repeat yourself. This is whenever you come across that scenario, that calls for a subflow. There are different use cases and scenarios, but this is the one that we're covering right now. When we built the schedule triggered flow and the record triggered flow, we needed to use the same line of logic, and that is get leadership user. So in the future, if that leadership user changes, then we're going to need to go to these two flows and change the conditions. Let's say we wanted to get the leadership whose last name is Islam, or his last name is John, or like first name is John or whatever. And then this person changes in the future. You're going to have to go to the two places to change it. So what you're going to do is we're going to create a subflow, and we're going to call it from these two places. And if the leadership user changes, we update it in the subflow, and then it updates automatically in the other two. Let's see how to do that. So I created this auto-launched flow, and then it does only have one thing in here. It has a get element, get leadership user. We're getting a user. Again, I'm not setting conditions for now. Feel free to. Get only the first record. We only need one user. And then down here, I'm only making one change. I'm selecting choose fields and assign variables advanced. What this is doing is that typically, if you select choose field, if you select the first two, the flow automatically creates a record variable for the record that is getting returned. The third one, it doesn't. It lets you control the returned data and where you want to put them. When you want to put them in a record variable that you created yourself, or you want to put them in like separate variables, a variable for each field. It's up to you. And because one thing we need to do is we're going to need to send the email that gets returned from the subflow to the parent flow. We're going to call this subflow from two other flows. The two other flows are going to call this subflow, and they expect to receive the email. So we need to send the email out. So we need to mark this email that it can be sent out. To do that, we're going to need to create a variable called text variable email, or like however you want to name it. And we need to mark it available for output, meaning it can go out of the subflow to whatever flow called it. So we need to mark this available for output. That's why we needed to create a variable, and that's why we needed to go with this option here. You can still use this and then use an assignment and assign the email into a variable. Both of them will work. I didn't intend to do that. Let's do that again. Text variable. Sorry, what we need is the email field, and we're putting this into the text variable email. So this is the subflow. Now let's go to both the flows that we built. This is the record triggered flow. Now I'm gonna get rid of this, and instead, okay, let's call the subflow first. And the subflow is down here. Alternatively, you can just like, I'll just get the API name, or maybe just the label, that's fine. And I'll just search here. And then I'll click that. That's the subflow that we built. I'll just give it the same name. And I like to name them like this. I like to name it with subflow at the beginning so people know that this is a subflow. And that's it. So you just call the subflow. The subflow then queries the user, and then it returns an email. How do you access the returned values? Let's go to the send email here, and down here in the list, and instead of using the get leadership here, I'm gonna delete this, and I'll access that subflow. It says output from subflow. That's the element now. That's the element here. Because it does have outputs, and that's the email. Because we marked it available for output, it shows up here. We can select that, and now we can delete this get element, and then we can save. We can do the same thing here. I'm gonna do the subflow first. Give it the same name, and send email. And then change this to the output, and email, and then delete this. That's it. So now these two flows are using the same subflow. Whenever we need to make a change, we make it on only one flow. Now let's talk about platform event triggered flows. This is the use case that I would think it's better to use Dolores declarative lookup rollup summaries for, but just for the purposes of understanding how platform events work. Let's say that we need to roll up the number of opportunities to the account level on delete. So we have a field at the account that says number of opportunities. And whenever we create a new opportunity, this number increases. And whenever we delete an opportunity, it decreases. So this is the behavior. And I'm talking about the second part only, the on delete. I'm assuming that we already have a process that aggregates adds whenever we create a new opportunity. What we are covering now is on delete only. Now, let's look at that first. Let's look at the flow that runs on delete. So I created the record triggered flow here on the opportunity object. Whenever the opportunity object, whenever an opportunity record gets deleted, we need to run this flow. Now, I want to show you one thing here. You see what it says here? It says before the record is deleted. So this flow, this on delete flow, runs before the record is deleted, not after the record is deleted. Now, let's say that we have an account and the number of opportunities on the account is 2, meaning there are 2 opportunities under that account. When we delete one of those opportunities, what would this number of opportunities field be after the delete? It's going to remain 2. If we do the logic in here where calculate the number of opportunities and then update the account, then it's going to remain 2. Why? Because this is running before delete, meaning this logic happens as follows. You click delete, the opportunity record is not deleted yet. You actually click delete, but it's not deleted from the database yet. That delete action triggers that before delete record triggered flow to calculate the number of opportunities. It goes to the opportunities, it finds 2 opportunities, it counts them, the return is 2, it puts the 2 on the account level, and then it goes ahead and then deletes one of the opportunities. Because it is running before delete, this is wrong. This is basically wrong. So we need to make it run after delete. To make it run after delete, we create a platform event. This is one of the ways. There might be other ways that I don't know of. You create a platform event, and this is like an object. You go to setup, and then you search for platform events. You create a platform event. It ends with __e. We've got __c for custom objects, so it's similar to that. And there is just like one distinction from a few distinctions, but one very important distinction is this here. Publish behavior, we can select to publish after commit or publish immediately. Publish immediately means it's part of the same transaction. Publish after commit means that it actually got committed to the database, and then this run is going to run after that commitment. And then we created one custom field here, account ID. This platform event, when it gets created, it's like an object. When someone creates a record of the platform event, then there is one field that they need to populate, and that's the account ID. And then we're going to use that account ID, find it, and then go find the opportunities under that account, count them, and then update that account. Now let's see how that works in the flows. Back to the record triggered flow on opportunity on delete. What we want this record flow to do is to just publish an event. And the way you publish an event is you use a create element, and then you select, as if you're selecting any other object, you select the name of the object. That's the platform event object that we created. And then you create a record. It is expecting an account ID. So we populate, that's the account ID from the opportunity. So it has published the event. The event is now published. And we create another flow, a platform event triggered flow. When the event is published, or when a record of that event object gets created, it triggers that other flow. And that flow is running after commit, meaning it has already got deleted. Now we run our logic here, which is fairly simple. Get the opportunities where the account ID matches the account ID that we sent to the platform event. Count those opportunities. We looked at the transform a minute ago, and then update the account that has the same ID, update the number of opportunities with this. So this solves this approach solves the problem of after commit. And this is just not the only use case. You're going to come across many use cases where you need to commit first before you run the logic. I apologize that we had to sprint through the last few use cases. We are always here to help and learn together. There are a few resources here that would be helpful. Feel free to check them out. You can find Apex Hours on Twitter, the website as well as here, Apex Hours on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow here. Apex Hours on YouTube, not just for flows, but pretty much for everything else related to Salesforce. And then Apex Hours Flow playlist. This is the dedicated one to flows if you want to dive deeper. I've also got my YouTube channel, and I've got a Salesforce Flow course that's available for free that I think this is the first time that gets announced, unless I announced on LinkedIn before this video is uploaded to YouTube. But basically this is just like very recent, and this is very detailed, not a crash course. Feel free to explore this course as well. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to message me anytime, and I've got a newsletter where I make such announcements. Thank you all for today. I wish you all the best.